How does a Christian love like Jesus? How do we love the same way that Jesus loved? Jesus preached love and cited the two greatest commandments that we have to follow. In Matthew 22:36-40, it says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." So let's go over what this means. So Jesus ranks that the most important law is loving God above all else. So he mentions that these two forms of love hang on the Ten Commandments. So the first four commandments, it talks about not having any other gods before God, not making an idol, not taking the Lord's name in vain, and remembering the Sabbath day. So those all involve God himself. So he ranks those as most important. So loving him. Now what does this mean? How do we love God with all our soul, all our strength? We place him in first place. We don't let anything get in the way of God. The moment that we value something more than God, we have made an idol of that object. Idols aren't merely just wooden or golden little statues that people worship. Idols can be other things like money, television, a job. A whole plethora of things could be considered an idol, and people can place that before God. So it's something that we have to be careful about. We have to always remember to keep God in first place. That is the most important thing that we have to follow. And then the second greatest that Jesus says is to love your neighbor as yourself. Neighbor doesn't mean just your next door neighbor. That means anyone near you, anyone you know is your neighbor. So you have to treat them with the same kind of love that you would treat yourself. So this means that if one of them wrongs you or angers you, if you were to call them a name or insult them in some other way, think of how you would feel if that same thing happened to you. If someone insulted you, how would you feel? You wouldn't feel very well. So therefore you shouldn't do it yourself to other people, because you're supposed to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Those are the two greatest commandments that Jesus says. And those aren't the only things that Jesus talks about regarding love, and those aren't the only examples that he mentions. The whole New Testament, the whole story of Jesus has so much of what he does involving love. So we as Christians, we want to be as much like Jesus as we can. We want to live like he did. We want to love like he did. We'll never reach the perfection that Jesus has, but we should strive to love like he did. We should strive to walk like he did when he was on earth. So Jesus was always obedient to God. He always obeyed the commands of God. He was pure in every way. He loved people selflessly, meaning that he was very humble to them. He was very humble when, in terms of how he treated people. And he commanded his disciples to love each other the same way that he had loved them. Now, when we say love your neighbors, it doesn't just mean people who you're on good terms with. Jesus also tells us to love our enemy, which is something very difficult for us to follow. Luke 6:35, "But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil." Who's your enemy? People who do wrong to you, people who hate you, people who have something against you for whatever reason. Even those people, we should treat them with love. We should hold no malice against them, no hatred against them. Even if they wrong us, we have to forgive them. This ties in with forgiveness. Think of the times that we have wronged God. It's an uncountable number of times, right? And God forgives us no matter how many times we sin against him. So therefore we too must forgive others. It says in Luke 23:34, and Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Jesus said this when he was getting crucified. And think of crucifixion. Actually put yourself in the place of the Bible, in the place of Jesus getting crucified. Crucifixion was a very horrible, cruel, and painful way of torture that the Romans did to people. And despite all of that, despite all the pain and torture Jesus was going through, when he was on the cross, he asked God to forgive them. He asked them to forgive them because they don't know what they're actually doing. They were crucifying Jesus, God himself on earth. Therefore, we too have to forgive people when they wrong us. Not only forgiveness, but Jesus wants us to be servants. So we place Jesus as the most important. We place God as the most important. And we should always strive to do that. But on earth, Jesus was very humble himself. He wasn't going around and saying, oh, I'm better than you, I'm better than this person, I'm the best person ever, right? He didn't go around saying that because he set an example for us to follow. Jesus was the greatest human to ever walk the earth, yet he himself was a servant at the same time. He was a master, but also a servant. It says in John 13:12-14, when Jesus had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. So what he's saying here is that even, like when people serve you, you should serve them as well. This means in anything like a workplace. If you're some sort of supervisor in a workplace, yes, you are people's boss, you have people under you, but you shouldn't act like you're better than them. You're not more important than them. You're not greater than them. You too should be a servant. We know Jesus is greater than all of us, but he still acted like a servant, and we should follow that example. So in the setting of a church, right? The church leader is a pastor. The pastor is the leader of the church. We follow the pastor, all the congregation are the sheep of the pastor. However, the pastor is not greater than the other people in his congregation. He's just recognized as a person of authority because he's the leader of that particular church, but he is no better than anyone else. And pastors too must be servants. Jesus sets this example. He's saying that none of us are greater than each other. Like, we all have equal value. We all should be humble and help serve each other. We shouldn't rank ourselves above other people. We shouldn't be selfish and think that we're better than others. We all have problems. We all have sinned against God. So, we're all human. Let's treat each other the same. Everything connects. All the forms of love, about being humble, loving your neighbor as yourself, all these things are connected. And Jesus, he didn't just talk the talk, he also walked the walk. So he showed us how to be in the place of a servant. He preached the message of love, but he didn't forsake the word of God. So this is one issue that some people might have when reading the Bible or learning about Christianity. Everyone agrees with the message of love, how preaching about love is a good thing. But the Bible does offend people. Jesus did offend people multiple times. He offended the Pharisees with a lot of the things he said, and he was doing this out of love. So when you're doing something out of love, it doesn't always mean the other person is going to be happy with what you do or say. Jesus offended them because he called them out on their sin. He called them out on what they were doing wrong. And they got mad at him. They were offended by what he was saying. But he did that out of love because he's trying to help them. People may be offended if you were to call them out on the wrongdoing, right? If we see someone sin, like a close friend or a church member, if we see them do something wrong, we can say, hey, you shouldn't do that. That's not a good thing. Sometimes they'll agree, sometimes they'll get angry at you, but we're doing that out of love. We're saying that out of love because we're trying to help them. So when Jesus offended people by what he said, he was trying to help them because he doesn't want them to sin anymore. He's calling out sin, right? We know sin is evil, and the more sin that we commit, the more we're wronging God. So he's just calling out the sin, and he has every right to. So he still didn't forsake the word of God. He was preaching about love, but he wasn't sugarcoating the word of God. He kept it truthful 100% all the time. And we as Christians, when we preach the word of God, we should do it with kindness and respect, but at the same time, we shouldn't forsake the word of God. We shouldn't leave out certain things that we think might offend people. We shouldn't sort of brush off certain facts. We shouldn't change some of the words of the Bible just to make people happy. We preach the full Bible, the full gospel in truth. That is what we are commanded to do. May God bless you.